let's do this. You received a handout tonight, stapled together, three things. I'll take them in order. The top piece, I'm assuming they're all stapled in the same order mine is. The top piece, a white sheet of paper, says Almond Branch Initiative on the top. For those of you who are interested in knowing more about Almond Branch, and I can explain a little bit more to you later on, but Almond Branch is a 501c3, a nonprofit organization that was started up around here 15 years ago. Jill Petrie is the head of it. There's a number of us who are involved with this organization. And the whole goal of Almond Branch Initiative is to bring almond branch, not olive branch. And by the way, that's a pun that comes out of Jeremiah 1:11. I can explain it to you sometime. We have a little bit more time, but it's meaningful in Israel. And the goal of Almond Branch is to bring help to those who are in hardship, to bring hope to those who are in hardship. And the ultimate goal is to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ to those in Israel through bringing humanitarian aid to them. And so we've been doing that for 15 years, a number of projects that, of course, we've been involved with, and you can read some of that here. And for those who are interested in helping out, there's information down below. You can always ask more questions about it later on after the study. I put out one of these reliable sources every time we do a prophecy update. For the most part, they're the same information. I did change some order around. I put a few new things on it. But people are always interested in knowing what's going on in Israel and not knowing where to find the news. Fox News does seem to be doing a fairly decent job at the moment. Even CNN has done okay. Forget MSNBC. But they just smell like sulfur. But anyhow, so sources here, sources for news, and that's important because a lot of people don't know where to go. And it's not all about TV. Use your computer, and you can find these things online. And then, of course, the yellow sheet of paper, Israel in the Crosshairs, prophecy update. So this gives you some idea of where we're going to go tonight. So let's see. I just want to get myself organized here. Tonight, the goal is this, at least as far as I'm concerned. You may have some other goal, but as far as I'm concerned, the goal tonight is to simply go through the basics. I don't want to get down into the weeds, but I do want to try and answer questions that people have. So in many ways, I'll kind of go by bullet point, you might say, instead of long paragraphs. So I don't want to get down into the weeds, but so that we can all sort of understand some things. We're going to go till about, it's 7:23 now, so around 8:10, I'm going to stop, believe it or not, talking. At least I'll take a breath. And then, but we're not going to like do a whole evening and then do a Q&A afterward. What we're going to do is if you have questions, and I'm amazed if you don't, but start writing your questions down, and then we'll take that next those 20 minutes at the end and kind of go through that. We'll have some mics that we can move around to people. And so get your questions formed now, write them down, so that when we say, what are your questions, you can immediately raise your hand and someone can bring you a microphone and we can see what you're interested in. So I thought what we would do is sort of work our way from the outside in. The last four and a half days have been, I've run out of adjectives. Staggering, there's one. Gruesome, brutal, breathtaking, gut-wrenching. On the one hand, I do think it's important for those who have the stomach for it to take a look at the seriousness of the atrocities, but I don't recommend it, on the other hand, for people. You don't need to see the atrocity to believe it. You just need to know that it's real. At this point, these are the numbers. You probably know them, but 1,200 dead, 1,200 in 4.5 days. 198 of those are IDF soldiers. The other, almost 1,000, or a little over 1,000, are civilians, mostly grandmas, moms, toddlers, little babies, brutally murdered. 2,700 injured, not just broken arms or cuts and bruises, but like fighting for their lives, injured. 200 missing. Make sure I turn this on. There we go. 200 missing, who are presumed to be mostly hostages. I said this on Sunday, but I want you to try and wrap your brain around this, because we tend not to think this way. just those numbers alone, if you're not struck by them, your heart's not beating. But I think it's important for us as Americans to try to wrap our brain around it. America's population is about 40 times that of Israel. So let's just do a little math. I've already done it for you. You don't have to do it. So if we say 1,200 dead, that's like saying in the last 4.5 days, 48,000 Americans were killed, murdered, basically, okay? 48,000 Americans. This is not TV. This is reality. This is not a movie, and it's almost like we're so used to seeing gruesome stuff. We shouldn't be, but we've gotten so desensitized to this sort of thing on TV. These are real people, 48,000 or 108,000 fighting for their lives because of those injuries, or 8,000 taken hostage. Would that bother you? Yeah. So who's doing this? Well, we say Hamas. But who are they? What is Hamas? Are we good to go, Rob? I'm on, right? So you want to turn that first one on? Okay, so here's, I got a better pointer so people won't make fun of me for my big, fat green thing. Okay, there we go. So here's Israel. And this little bitty strip of land here, remember, just for comparison's sake, Israel from the top of the Golan down to the bottom, down by Eilat, roughly the size of New Jersey, north to south, and less than New Jersey, east to west. So here's Gaza Strip, so Flemington and Washington Crossing, not Flemington, but Washington Crossing and Lambertville, all that stuff right there. Gaza Strip, that's where Hamas lives. And from, we don't have the names of some of these towns like Sderot. Sderot, you might recall, SD is hard to pronounce. Sderot is a town 1.5 kilometers just to the east of the Gaza Strip. Almond Branch, we did some work there back in 2008. We were there 2009. In fact, Glenn made comment about this on Sunday, about taking a walk. We did prayer walks around the neighborhood, and you could look through the holes in the walls of these houses, because Sderot, over the years, going up to 2009, Sderot had already taken 10,000 rocket hits in 10 years. 10,000 Katyusha rocket hits. And that's why we did work down there. We built a playground down there. But anyhow, so Sderot then is just outside. You basically say there's Gaza and Sderot's right there. Kfar Aza and some of these others that have been hit by these atrocities are right along that strip right there. So that's where Hamas lives. So 3 groups we're going to talk about for the moment. Hamas lives here, up here Lebanon, and on this side part of Syria, but are all controlled by a group called Hezbollah. And Hezbollah, Hamas, 2 different groups politically and all that, but we would call them, collectively speaking, Palestinians. All right. I want to try to keep it high view here. And then there's another group that don't have a geographic location, but they're in those general areas too, called Islamic Jihad. Those of us who are a little older, which in this room is probably most of us can remember, Yasser, that's my baby, Arafat, remember him? Yasser Arafat died in 2004. He was the one who started up the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. When he died, the PLO splintered. And that's when, Hamas, Hezbollah comes in around 2006. They all begin to grow at that point. So, and let's also kind of step back for a minute. We can get into more of it later on if you have questions, but just so that we all have a general understanding, I think most American Christians, most Americans in general, but even Christians who have the ability to know better, don't understand a lot of times what is a Palestinian. A Palestinian is not Palestinians are not an ethnic group. Someone who lives in Palestine, it's not called that anymore, but it used to be called Palestine up until 1948 when Israel made the conquest and they became the State of Israel, May 14, 1948. But it's someone who's called a Palestinian is someone who lived in the land area called Palestine, just like if most of us here live in Pennsylvania. we're not united as an ethnic group because we're Pennsylvanians. I'm a Jerseyite, but I'm no different ethnically than the rest of you. We're all sort of a dog's dinner of, an ethnic mix. And in a sense, that's really what the Palestinians are. We can go into more of the history later, but suffice to say, it comes about this way. After the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, about 65 years later, the destruction of the temple, destruction of Jerusalem, but a lot was still left standing. Rome still had the area. A revolt happens in 131 AD. Don't worry, we're not in the weeds, just stay awake. And it was called the Bar Kokhba revolt. And Bar Kokhba actually accomplished a lot, but it really ticked off Emperor Hadrian so much that he plowed it under all of Jerusalem. He salted the fields of everything that was called Israel. It was all called Israel up to that point, okay? He salted the fields so nothing could grow. And he renamed the city Aia Capitolina after his gods, the pantheon of the Roman gods. And he called the land of Israel the most insulting thing he could come up with. He called it Palestinia. In other words, he called them their ancient enemies, the Philistines. But don't make a mistake. They're not Philistines. There's no Philistine blood there. We can go into more of it later if you're interested, but basically it's a mix of the descendants of Ishmael, the descendants of Esau, and all these others that you read about in Genesis. We can go into details later. But it's mixed bloods who really are in these other areas. And I guess I'm in control of this, right? So, or am I? So am I in control of this? There we go. So this is a zoom-out view. But so here's Israel here. You can hardly see that, okay. But here's Israel here, Syria up here, Jordan. You can see that? Jordan, Egypt, okay. So Jordan made up of really 3 ancient biblical groups. Today it's called Jordan. That's a relatively recent name. But it's made up of 3 groups that you've read them in the Bible: Moab, Ammon, and Edom. Moab and Ammon, or you remember after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot's daughters got dad drunk, slept with him, and they had children, and called one Moab, from father, the other Ben-Ami, son of my people. And the Moabites and the Ammonites lived in those areas. And then later on, Edom, those are the descendants of Esau, Jacob, right, and his twin son Esau. He takes the southern portion of that area. Today we call it Jordan. But those people still live there. Those ethnic groups, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, they still all live there. I said I wouldn't get in the weeds, but just so that we understand this, these countries, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, you read them in your Bible. They've been around for thousands of years. I mean, we're going back beyond Christ, easily 1,000 years before and even further. Assyria was around after the flood. So, I mean, we're going back up 4,000 years at this point, okay? So those people, the ethnic Assyrians, still live in that general area. Okay, so when we talk about Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, and there are more groups, but those are the 3 big players right now. What unites them? They're Islamic. And as they're Islamic, they hate Israel. Incidentally, they hate you too. They hate God's people. And you could probably imagine why. We can get into a little bit of that in a minute. But they hate Israel. What unites those 3 radical groups is that they're Islamic and they're radical. They have this hatred for Israel. But all of their funding for these groups here, the funding comes from this place over here. Ancient Persia. See, the ancient players that you read about in your Bible, that you say, how do you pronounce some of these names? God wants you to know these because the names keep changing in modern times, but they're still the same people. Right? I won't give you examples, but you can think of ancient names of places that the names change over time, but it's still the same place geographically. In many cases, the same ethnic or ethnicities living there. And that's the case with Iran. They're called Iran today, but you talk to an Iranian and most of them say, no, I'm a Persian. They're proud of their Persian legacy, okay? And so it's ancient Persia here, now known as Iran, who's funding what's going on in Hamas, Hezbollah, and Islamic Jihad. And what's their goal? Islamic Jihad says it all. Jihad, we should all know by now, but jihad means what? Holy war. This is a holy war. Before we go further, let's understand something. I mean, I've been a pre-trib rapture guy for pretty much as long as I've been a Christian, with the exception of a few years when I got a little confused and I became a mid-trib guy, and you don't want to know why, but anyhow, probably for the same reason a lot of people do it sometimes. But then I got back on track. And my reason for getting back on track was I realized it's all about Israel. This Bible, I've said it to many of you before, if you take your finger and put one finger in Genesis 12 and your other finger in Acts 2, and you turn it upside down, it's going to look like that. And that's all Israel. It's not about you or me. It's not about America. It's not about Europe. It's about Israel. This is an Israeli book. And so with that in mind, we had this tendency to think, well, when we see things going bad in the world, we think Jesus is coming. Well, he is coming back. We think Obama's in the White House. Maybe he's the Antichrist. You know, or he's in the White House and they lit up the White House in this rainbow colors. So Jesus must be coming back. Donald Trump came in the White House. We say, well, okay, well, at least that's good for now. A lot of people thought, like he's some sort of a messianic figure. Like, we know better, but we start to think, oh, things are getting better. He's a man. He's just a man, just like any other president. Biden gets in the White House, and whoever runs the place, you know, we think Jesus is coming back. The return of Jesus Christ does not depend on who is in the White House. The return of Jesus Christ doesn't depend on how the power forces in Europe have coalesced, or what Russia is doing, or what China is doing. They're indicators of where we are in one way on the timeline. But Israel is God's timepiece. If it's an old saying, but it's still true. If you want to know where we are on God's prophetic plan, you have to look at Israel. You have to watch Israel, and that's how you know where we are. We assume, we're Americans, you know, so we assume that everybody's opinions matter. We think everybody has a right to speak up, and that's nice. That's because we're Americans. And that's, people's opinions really don't matter that much in America, sadly. But we think they should, and we think around the world it should be, and we think pluralistically and all that. But when you get right down to it, this is a, keep going the wrong way here. Where am I supposed to? There we go. No, wrong way. There we go. You see what that says? On our tour, we went to visit Golani 13. Golani 13 became famous after the '67 war because of the courage that they showed in battle. On our tour, we went to visit this unit. We see them frequently when we go over there. We try to take tours to see them. And we spent the better part of a day with them. I could show you lots of pictures, but we don't have time for it. I could show you pictures of Joe Transitella with the big, you know, bazooka. I could show you pictures of the big spread they made for us of all these people climbing on tanks and personnel carriers and all that. They're great guys. They hosted us well. But this was inside one of their tents, and if you can make out the image, right? You see the lion and you see the sheep. It says in Hebrew, the lion doesn't care about the opinion of the sheep. The lion doesn't care about the opinion of the sheep. God doesn't care about the opinion of the people. He's going to do things in his timing. Now, that's not with the intention of that, but I thought it was a great illustration of that truth. God's not listening to what everybody else is saying. He's like, gee, should I move now? What do you think, Gabriel? You know, it's not working like that. He's the king. and we've forgotten what kings are all about. He's the king, and he rules, and it's going to happen on his schedule. And when we talk about Islam, Islam doesn't care about anything else except one thing, and that's worldwide conquest. Islam's sole goal is to conquer the world and to establish the worldwide caliphate. The establishment of a worldwide caliphate means to establish a caliph, think of a king, the ruler, who rules the whole world. And it's a unified government, basically, that unifies the whole world. And the way to accomplish that is to kill the Jews and to kill the Christians. The saying is to kill the Jews on Saturday and to kill the Christians on Sunday. The Jews are called the little Satan, or Israel's called the little Satan, America's called the big Satan. That is their goal. That's always been their goal. It still is their goal. And ultimately to convert the world at sword point to Islam. That is the goal. Check it out for yourself. People who tell you that Islam is a peaceful religion, no, there are peaceful people, and there are nice people. That's the thing. We have to be careful how we do this. But Islam itself is a wicked religion. It's not just not quite right. No, it's a wicked religion. And really, at its root, all religions serve Satan. They don't serve God, the one true living God, do they? No, and we get confused about that. But Islam is a stark contrast to anything we know about the truth. So it's important for us to understand this, because I know that we get very confused about it. So we'll get back to Israel in a minute, but I want us to sort of work through an understanding. There is a vein, I don't know how else to put it, but there's this vein of hatred and of violence that is running through the world right now. It's always been there, but it's really shown its head in recent years. More and more it's showing its head. 9/11, aside from all the conspiracy theories, but 9/11 was an example of that. But the hatred is still against God's people, and it's against people in general. And why is that? Why is it against people? Because Lucifer, Satan, hates God's creation. Quickly, Genesis 1:26, God says, let us now make man in our image. All right? Let's make man in our image, after our likeness, right? So you and I are created after God's image, after his likeness. And he even gives man the assignment to rule, to be sovereign over the world, and to rule all things. But we've gone through this before, but you can look at it yourself. In Isaiah chapter 14, Satan gives his declaration there of his 5 main goals. But ultimately, I will ascend on the Mount of God. I shall be above God. I will be like the Most High. I'm going to be the one who rules. So that's his goal, and yet God created man in God's image. So it was Lucifer's goal to overthrow man. So sin happens, Genesis 3. And then, of course, after that, after God provides a redemption promise, of course, then the whole Nephilim thing starts in Genesis 6. But the point is that throughout the whole history of the Old Testament, and sadly, most Christians don't read their Old Testament. I think you guys do, but most Christians really don't read their Old Testament, so they don't understand what the real story is. It's great that they believe that Jesus Christ is the Redeemer, but they don't read the whole story and understand what's really happening and why it's happening. So anyhow, that said, think about it for a moment. Go back to Genesis chapter 10. What happens there? Nimrod. That's before Abraham. Nimrod is the one who said, let us make our own plan, and we'll ascend to the heights of God. Who does that sound like? Right? That sounds like Satan. Even his own name, Nimrod, means we will rebel. Ishmael, he wants to kill Isaac. Esau wants to kill Jacob. After Jacob begins to have his family, and he has his sons, daughter, et cetera, and he becomes a family, 70 go down to Egypt. They multiply down in Egypt over the time that they're there. New Pharaoh, who didn't know Joseph, didn't care about them, and sees that Israel's growing so greatly, what does he seek to do? Kill all the male children, right? And you know the whole story that ultimately the Exodus happens. But Pharaoh hates Israel. Why? Satan hates Israel. And God delivers them out of Egypt. And they flee into the wilderness, and you know what happens as they go through the wilderness. But you can even just take the Exodus story and look at the people that they fought against, but especially the Amalekites in Exodus 17. These people are important to remember because these are the ones who continue to hate Israel today, and God names them throughout the story. So whether we're talking about the Amalekites, the Midianites, as I mentioned earlier, Assyria, Babylon, Persia. Remember Haman tried to destroy all of the Israelites. And of course, he dies on his own gallows, but it's always the goal to destroy Israel, Antiochus Epiphanes in 165. Of course, we see what Rome does. And after Rome, I mentioned, Hadrian and the diaspora. Israel's distributed around the world. We have a tendency to look back and look at Hitler. Well, yeah, it's good that we don't forget that. But Hitler, as terrible as the Holocaust was, and it was, I mean, it was, the whole idea of a planned genocide, and he only accomplished the destruction of 6 million Jews, 1/3 of all that's called Israel throughout the world. He would have tried to kill them all if he'd been able to do it. Even as he knew he was losing the war, he diverted his military resources to kill as many more Jews as he could. What was his goal? Well, his goal was world conquest, because that's Satan's goal. Satan doesn't care who he works through. It doesn't have to be Islam. He just wants a ruler who follows him. But when Hitler could not accomplish that, he diverted his resources to kill Jews, more Jews, I should say. And so you can go through whether you're talking about through the diaspora, the Crusades. Think of the Inquisition. All of that's all about the Jews, a hatred for the Jews. And so we come then to the Palestinians, and so here we are with this group of people who live in Gaza, and really live in other parts of Israel. In the West Bank, there are many there who are called Palestinians. Again, it's not an ethnic group, so don't let anybody confuse you about this. And before we go further, this idea of their right to the land, quickly. In 1948, Israel takes the land of Palestine. And Ben-Gurion declares that the name of the place will be Israel. He cites Ezekiel 37 as his authority, and he says this is called the dry bones live. He says the land will be called Israel. The bones live today. And so, he saw the prophecy and he believed in it. Those who were living in the land, who were the inhabitants, non-Jewish inhabitants of the area called Palestine, therefore called Palestinians, not because of their ethnicity, but because of their locality, right? Jordan didn't want them. Jordan would not take them back. Israel offered them citizenship, but they said they didn't want it. So Israel tried to accommodate them, said, well, you kind of live over in this area, and we'll live over here. And we could get into the games that the nations were really playing with that, because they don't really care about the Palestinians. From a Jordanian perspective, for example, the Jordanians are a monarchy. It's a king. King Hussein really runs the country. It's a monarchy. And they saw the Palestinians as a less than. The Jordanians, they said, we don't want the big garbage. You keep them. But that way they could put them as poster children to declare the hatred of the Jews against the Palestinians. It's all a public relations game in that regard. Okay, so what's happening now, and I'm sure it's going to happen, if it's not in the next few days, certainly in the next week or so, more and more we're going to hear about a call for a ceasefire. Even yesterday, Hamas said, okay, can we just have a ceasefire and we'll talk, right? Well, okay, so you figured that out, right? But you know as well as I do, we've all been around long enough to know what the UN does with this. And they're going to say, Israel, come on, stop being the bully. By the way, people are already saying these are war crimes. That what Hamas did was to commit war crimes. These are not war crimes. This is jihad. There's no rules in jihad. They don't think as you and I think. And we're trying to apply Western reasoning to this. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. And I'm sorry to disappoint, and you may want to argue and say, oh no, everybody can be rational. No. And by the way, when I say that, it's not because I hate Palestinians or anything. It's not true. I mean, I just know it from observing it and having lived for a while. But in any event, there's a difference between the way Israel does things and the way the Palestinians do things. Here's a good graphic. There we go. Can you see this? So what this shows you, here's a soldier of Israel with a baby carriage behind him, right? He's guarding that baby carriage. Here's a Hamas soldier with the baby carriage as a human shield. It's a perfect illustration of certainly what we've already seen. You know that whatever the conditions are of the hostages that were taken on Saturday, to the degree that they're even alive, they want there to be the presumption that they are alive because they believe that way that Israel will not attack those buildings wherever they suspect the hostages are. The human shields, that's the whole idea. That's the way that they tend to work. Why? Because they don't appreciate life the way you and I do. I mean, let's face it. Hamas knew, Islamic Jihad knew, Iran knew that they could only yank Israel's chain so long before Israel said, okay, we're going to scrub the surface of Gaza. We're just going to plow it under, which is what's happening now. They knew that was going to happen. Why would they allow that? Because they don't care about life. Life is dispensable. They really don't care about it. They don't value it. Because the devil doesn't. It's really important to know this. Okay, so I want to make sure I hit a couple of things. So look, I'll make sure I hit this before we go to Q&A. There are a lot of Bible teachers around, and I certainly don't consider myself one of the biggies. Well, I could stand to lose a little bit more weight, but I mean, not a big name. And I love many of them. Amir Sarfati is one of my favorites. I like him a lot. I've noticed something over the years, though. It's kind of funny how it works. If you're from Israel, if you're a Messianic believer from Israel, you're a Sephardic Jew like he is, American Christians dig that. You know something special because you're from Israel. And that's the way it is with Amir. I mean, I like him. I think he's right on in a lot of things. And we all have a right to be wrong. We all are wrong in many of our perspectives on things. And Amir has, I may say something here that you may not be familiar with. I'm a firm believer that what we're watching here is the beginning of something that's called the Psalm 83 war. Others don't believe that. Amir is someone who says, no, what's written in Psalm 83 is not future prophecy. It was fulfilled in 1948 at the War of Independence. And he has a right to believe as he wishes. Here's something to consider. I've heard it said certainly in recent days, and I really believe this, that we tend to see the War of Independence in Israel as an event that had a beginning and an end, and then life went on in the new state of Israel. 75 years later, they're still fighting the War of Independence. They're still fighting for their right to exist. And so in that regard, Amir's right, and so am I. Not me. It's not about me. I don't mean it that way. There's many people who do believe it. If you want to look in your Bibles in Psalm 83, and some of what is in your notes may help in some of this. But in Psalm 83, I'm just going to go through it quickly, again, because we have Q&A. But this is the last of Asaph's Psalms. He writes Psalm 50, 73, and this one, 83. You can kind of look at them all as the history of Israel. But this one, I believe, because the last one, I do believe it's prophetic for many reasons, and no time to get into all of that right now. But look at what he says. I'm going to read through it, and hopefully you'll see some of this thing. He says, don't keep silent, O God. Don't hold your peace. Don't be still, O God, for behold, your enemies. Whose enemies? God's enemies. Your enemies are making a tumult, and those who hate you lift up their head. They've taken crafty counsel against who? Your people. They've taken counsel against your people. They've consulted together against your sheltered ones. And they've said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation. Do you see what's going to have you? You don't have to watch a whole lot of news to figure out that that's exactly what's being said by Hamas right now. Their sole goal, not just Hamas, but all of Islamic Jihad, all of Hezbollah. I mean, we're looking at three fronts right now. We're looking at whatever is left in the Gaza region, and there's still even rockets coming from there that today, even, Ben Gurion Airport, parts of Tel Aviv, Ashdod, Ashkelon, parts of Jerusalem and the areas around that have been hit by these rockets. But on the northern border, where you have Lebanon to the western side and you have Syria to the east, controlled by Hezbollah, and they have at minimum 125,000 rockets and missiles. Some are called dumb rockets, some are called smart. A dumb rocket doesn't have a guidance system. It's basically, you point it in the right direction with the right arc, and you hope to hit something. It still leaves a mark, but others are smart rockets. They have guidance systems, that sort of thing. Most of them have ballistic warheads, but some, it's been reported for years, are reputed to have chemical and biological warheads. Don't know how many, but in any event, so all of these are united in one desire, and that's a hatred for Israel and a desire to wipe them off the map. And you'll hear it said, I'm sure you've heard it said, we've all heard it said, that the Muslim world hates Israel because they have this place in the Middle East. They shouldn't have this area. I want you to take a look again at this. So there's, can you even see the red mark covers up Israel? Okay, so in round numbers, let's say this is the Middle East. You with me? 1/6 of 1% of the landmass in the Middle East is Israel. You think anybody really cares? So what's that? Is that if I had $600, would it make a difference if I gave you $1? 1/6 of 1%. No, landmass is not the issue. They say that, but that's not the issue. Okay, so look what they're saying here. They've taken counsel against your people. They've said, come, verse 4, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. That's the sole goal. For they have consulted together with one concern. They've formed a confederacy. Who has? All of the peoples around Israel have formed a confederacy. What does it mean to form a confederacy? To confederate, nation plus nation plus nation plus nation, right? That's a confederation. They formed a confederacy against who? God. You, against God. And then he names names. But you'll not find it reported in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or any modern publication, because these are ancient names. But we have the magic decoder ring. And he tells us who they are. Now, you've got a handout for some of these things, but look at what he says. Verse 6, the tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites. It sounds like an old group, like Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs or something, right? Who are the tents of Edom? Here, let's check it out. I have more trouble. Okay, there we go. So this is one way of looking at it. It's just kind of gross. Not abstract. Here's Israel. The tents of Edom. So here's Jordan today. The tents of Edom are down here. Actually, let's just do this. There we go. The tents of Edom are down here. That's where they're from. So Ammon, Moab, Edom, those are their ancient areas. But today we'd call the three of them Jordan. The tents of Edom, it says. Moab, you see it. The Hagarites. Well, remember Hagar? Hagar, where'd she come from? The Bible, you say, right? Where? Yeah, Egypt. When, remember Abraham and Sarah went down there during the famine? And he said, just tell them you're my sister, huh? Okay, so they brought back Hagar. The Hagarites are people from that area. You can look at it a couple different ways, but the easiest way is to say they come from, if nothing else, this part of the Sinai Peninsula. That's the belief, okay? Gibal tends to be considered toward the north of, well, Tyre, so the northern part of Lebanon. Amalek, remember the Amalekites, okay, in the northern part of the Sinai Peninsula. Philistia, we would call them the Palestinians today, right, with the inhabitants of Tyre. Lebanon. Assyria also has joined in with them. You say, well, wait a minute, Assyria's not on the map today. Well, that's true. We would say Assyria is part of Syria and Iraq. These are modern borders. Okay, they didn't exist in ancient times. You got to go by the ancient borders. And by the way, there's Damascus. That becomes an interesting city for later on. They've all joined in, and they have helped the children of who? Lot. Who are the children of Lot? Moab and Ammon. That's exactly who we're playing in this game right now. It's not a game. It's a deadly game. But that's who they are. Now, by the way, some of you might be saying, look, I know a little bit about, modern geopolitics, John. Like Jordan's cool. I mean, they're not creating issues. Oh. I mean, don't they have a treaty with Israel? Yeah, they do. And what about Egypt? I mean, they're cool. They've actually tried to keep things cool on the southern border of the Gaza Strip. They got a treaty. So they're okay. Why would they declare war? How many treaties do you know of that last forever? How long did you ever take a history class? I mean, one thing for sure, if you're an American Indian, you know that every treaty that was ever made, the Indians are the Native Americans, the indigenous peoples, are the only people who were here before we were that we actually called nations. And we made treaties with them, and we broke every last one of them, right? Treaties, it's kind of like saying laws are made to be broken, but treaties are broken because wars are fought over resources, over power, and the same thing with treaties. Treaties are made and broken for those reasons. Okay, so I feel in the one sense, on the one hand, I feel like, okay, John, you're such a broken record. You've been talking about the Psalm 83 war for so many years, and that's true, I have. But now, in my opinion, at least, and it's only my opinion, it doesn't mean I'm right, but it seems that these are beginning to play out. Let's just read the rest of it quickly, okay? So he says to them, deal with them as you did with Midian, as with Sisera. And you remember all that? You remember Deborah and Barak? And Barak, Deborah says, you go and fight them. And he said, well, I'll go if you go with me. She says, okay. But the woman will get the honor. Remember that? We all think Deborah got the honor. No, you didn't read the rest of the story. It was not her. Who was it? Who was the one with the tent peg? Yael. What'd she do when Sisera fled? He said, can I come and rest in the tent? She said, sure, come on in, drink some milk. Falls asleep, takes the tent peg, boom, nailed him right to the ground, right? So she got the honor in that one. But my point is, deal with them as you did with Midian, as you did with Yabin at the brook Kishon and perished at Endor, and it goes through all this. I'm going to leave it there for a moment because that's enough of Psalm 83. What I want to get at here, because I'm trying to keep it as much bullet point as I can. Where's it going? Well, think of it for a moment. See what's happening. Here's Israel. And those of you who are on the tour with us, we've all heard the term, but we heard it. We had a strategic briefing up on the Syrian border with a friend of ours called Ilan Shulman. And he referred to the borders of Israel as a ring of fire, because that they all hate Israel. Even if these people in Jordan have a treaty, and these people in Egypt have a treaty. Ultimately, they hate Israel, so it's a ring of fire. Now, it hasn't been stoked in Jordan, hasn't been stoked in Egypt yet, but soon it will be ignited. Now, what unites them all? I've told you over and over. What unites all of these nations? They're all Islamic. Now look, you read the rest of the story, you're going to find out that Israel will prevail, that all of their enemies are going to be destroyed. And yes, God will do it. In my opinion, Israel will see it as their strong army that did it. It's only my opinion, but it seems that way as I read through the scripture. But think of what it's going to look like when that's all over. The Islamic threat will have been pushed way back, way back. But in the meantime, have you noticed what's going on just in these last 2 days? 3 fronts in this war. Gaza Strip, the north, Hezbollah, rockets coming over the northern border, and we've been hearing now about rockets coming from Damascus. Of all things for Netanyahu to say, and he's a prime minister who knows the Bible, Netanyahu said to Syria yesterday, if you attack us, Damascus will be a heap of ruins. Turn to Isaiah 17. Turn to Isaiah 17 quickly. Because it says here, Isaiah 17 verse 1, the burden against Damascus, behold, Damascus will cease from being a city. It will be a ruinous heap. Damascus will cease from being a city. It will be a ruinous heap. You can read through the rest of it. I want you to turn somewhere else, but I can tell you, if you read this later on, chapter 17, you pick up the clear sense that people will see Damascus on one day, the next day they'll wake up, and it will be a smoldering heap of ruins. I mean, try to imagine that on Fox and Friends tomorrow morning. Serious. Try to imagine that. Try hard to imagine that. The millions of people who live in Damascus. It's the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. Oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. Turn to Jeremiah 49. Because what we read in Jeremiah 49, it's a parallel prophecy to Isaiah 17. And he says, there's a lot here, but I'll just read a couple things to you. He says, beginning in verse 23, he speaks about Hamath and Arpad, which are cities in Damascus to the north. They've heard bad news. They're faint-hearted. There's trouble on the sea. It can't be quiet. Damascus has grown feeble. She turns to flee. Fear has seized her. Anguish and sorrows have taken her like a woman in labor. Why is the city of praise not deserted, the city of my joy? Therefore her young men shall fall in the streets, and all the men of war shall be cut off in that day, says the Lord of hosts. I will kindle a fire in the wall of Damascus. I will kindle a fire in the wall. The wall of Damascus, much of it still stands. What do you think it's made of? Wood? Stone. How do you burn stone? How do you do that? How do you burn a stone? How would you have burned stone back in the Civil War days? How would you have done that? With great difficulty, wouldn't you? How would you do it today? Yeah. This is technology that exists today that didn't exist back then. People were puzzled by this for the longest time, thought, well, it's poetry. Prophets speak in poetic terms. Well, now it makes sense, doesn't it? So Jeremiah is giving us more information in that regard. He's giving us more light than Isaiah has. Isaiah gives us the basics, says it's going to be a ruinous heap, and you'll wake up tomorrow morning or some morning, and it'll be smoldering. Then Jeremiah tells us, the fire has been kindled in the wall. It goes on and tells us about some other interesting things, too, that speak to Iran. I would suggest to you, I don't know it, but it would appear, and that's all it is. Acts 17:11 applies. Luke is telling you, don't believe Hessler. Check it out for yourself. But it would appear that the sequence of things seems to be that what is begun in Israel, I mean, do you think someone's just going to turn it off, say, never mind? That's not happening. You think someone's just going to negotiate, okay, time to stop, let's take a breather? No, Israel's going to accomplish everything they can to destroy their enemy. And many of us are conflicted about that. I was just talking to a brother earlier walking in here saying, my heart is so hard, I hate these people. Like, I understand how you're feeling. But on the one hand, God says we're to hate evil. We get confused as Christians, supposed to love everybody. God said, if someone murders someone, their life is to be destroyed. Right. We've forgotten this. We live in this pluralistic culture that says, well, maybe he's not such a bad guy. No, God says destroy him. So in that regard, Israel's doing what they ought to do biblically. But that's okay. How far do you think that can go? Why would Damascus hold back? Incidentally, I just read it today, that there were interesting movements from the area of Iraq, which is just to the east of Syria. Interesting movements of convoys in toward Syria. It appears to be weapons being shipped in from Iran across Iraq into Syria. Iran is the one who has all the interest in it. Syria is their client state, or proxy is the word everybody's using. Lebanon and Syria are client states. They're proxies of Iran. And then these little groups causing all the trouble, Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, and the others, also proxies. They work at the behest of Iran. Make no mistake about it, Iran's sole goal is world conquest, the growth of Persia and the ownership of the world ultimately, including the destruction of the United States of America. And especially since Obama, the number of radical Muslims who have taken up residence in the United States, enormous. So you can see, I think, how it could play out. I won't get into Ezekiel 38 and 39, but I'll leave you with this. The beginning part of Ezekiel 38 and 39, which is a confederation of nations that are not that ring, but are also Islamic, come in against the people who've come out of war, it says, who are living at peace, which means confidence. That would be Israel after this war. So it would seem that that's where we are. The natural question is, so when's the rapture? I don't know. Neither do you. But we're to be ready. All right, so I went 3 minutes over my promise. You may have some questions. If you don't, I don't know why not. So we've got a couple of microphones. Well, let's do it this way. If you would raise your hands, plural, then they'll bring a mic to one person. We'll bring a mic to the second person. There's Tito over here. Who else over here? Who's got a question? You got to raise it higher. These guys can't see it. Hand that short. Tito.
Is this on?
We can hear you.
So when we were in Israel, we went through some areas. I remember Jericho. We weren't allowed to go in the West Bank. These were areas that were occupied by the Palestinians. Do we know if those areas are being mobilized or surrounded so that they don't? I mean, do they have weaponry in there? Because if you have Gaza shooting into Sadat and other areas,
right.
The West Bank is so close to Jerusalem, and
oh yeah,
and then Jericho will help out Lebanon up in the north. So like what's happening there? Like, do you know if the Israelis are like containing them, and why isn't there activity from there, only from Gaza?
Yeah, well, the presumption is that they're doing the best they can to contain them. So here's the West Bank, which it's not all bad. I mean, but there's certain portions. I mean, there's 3 different types of areas in the West Bank. One that no Jew is allowed in, or anybody with a Jewish rental car, is allowed in, and then others, there are areas A, B, and C. And B and C, you can go into. B, be careful. C is, fine, come on in. Head on a swivel. But so there's the West Bank, but you might remember back in June, where in Jenin and some of these other places, the IDF had an operation there, and they took out some of the radicals that were there because they had this enormous cache of weapons, because radicalism was fomenting there, and they had to take it out. So the presumption is that there are those pockets, because Iran, through these clients, or through these proxies, have been secretly shipping these weapons in. So yeah, I mean, and that's been the thing that they've noticed. It's not just the terrorists who came in on Saturday, but ones that were already in there, embedded It's a really scary situation. There's a question over here. And anybody else who has a question, we'll get a microphone to you.
Real quick.
Yes.
I know you have contacts and friends in Israel. Have you heard from any of them?
Yes. We have some friends. We have some contacts. I'll tell you first of all about Steve Flores. He is our missionary up in Katzrin. So here's the map of Israel. And let's see, there's Nazareth. So Katzrin's sort of like there. So here's the top of the Golan Heights. Here's the Sea of Galilee. Okay, so a little further, there's Katzrin. So he's about, you know, you can see how the border is shaped kind of funny. So he's about 15 kilometers from one border. He's probably, you know, another 30 kilometers from another border, but it's all there. So Steve doesn't tell me a lot of things, even though I keep asking him, but I said, what are you doing? He said, well, we're in a prayer meeting in the bomb shelter. I said, okay. His son is in logistics with the IDF, so he's at a base nearby. And I've asked him to keep us in touch in terms of any assistance that they need, ways that we can help them, you know, financially, because there's going to be outreach opportunities. And outreach opportunities for us, first of all, we want to help people, but also it's a way to share the Lord with people. So that's them. And of course, we have, let's see, who do I know? We don't, well, the tour knows this, but I didn't tell everybody else. Golani 13, which is the group that we saw when we were on the tour, we learned on, I guess it was Monday, that of the unit, 37, as of Monday, 37 had died, and 3 had been taken hostage. I'm assuming more probably had died, because the Golani Brigade is considered their infantry, and so they're the ones who are doing all the groundwork right now in Gaza. So they're hurting pretty badly. Aaron Lipkin just keeps saying, we're doing fine, thanks. So yeah, actually I heard from, some of you may remember, Yossi Goldberger was here back in the summer, last November rather, and Yossi, his son, had just came out of the IDF about a month ago. Of course, he was called back in. So everybody's concerned about where their family and friends are going. I don't know of anybody who's actually lost a loved one who I've heard of yet. Other questions? There's one over here. Okay, and then whoever else over here, tell Josh.
I have a question that a lot of the terrorists are probably here, and you hear about sleeper cells and all that kind of stuff. But my question is, when they start coming up Broad Street, and I, for one, am ready, and I imagine a lot of us are ready, but then Glenn just gave a beautiful talk last Sunday about being meek, and I'm conflicted. I would think take care of my family and my extended family here.
I think it's a great question.
Yeah.
No, and I think it's a great question. I can see why you would feel conflicted. Let's remember what meekness is. I mean, how did Glenn define it? Hmm?
It's to be, you're standing with Christ alone. I mean, everybody's going to come against you, but you just continue staying who you are in Christ.
Okay. So, but one of the great definitions for meekness is strength or power under control. So you may have the power, but you don't want to whack everybody. Right. But when it's time, you do what you have to. Okay. Does that help define the balance better?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And I don't actually know that any of us are ready. So you may think that because you may be a good shot on paper, but it's different when you're under stress. Don.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand how there's about 1 million or more Arabs who are Israeli citizens, I assume Palestinians, and yet others are on the outside and not able to be citizens of Israel in Gaza or the West Bank. So how did that happen historically? Why is that?
Let me see. Can you try me again? You said 1 million or so Palestinians, we'll call them.
Yeah, who are citizens of Israel. Many of them very happy to be citizens of Israel. We've met some of them.
Mm-hmm.
And others are on the outside in the West Bank or Gaza who are not able to be Israeli citizens. They're non-citizens. How did that happen? Why are some citizens and others not?
Well, because those who wanted citizenship, I mean, it's more complicated than what I'm about to say, but for our purposes here, I'll keep it this way. Over the course of the last 75 years, it's a lot of history to pack into a quick response. But first of all, they were all offered citizenship, said no. and they wanted independence. But they were kind of floating around almost, I don't want to call them tribes, but in a sense, pockets around Israel. Many of them in the southwestern area, okay? And ultimately, by 2005, because they wanted Gaza, and Gaza was one of those cities that they already had, and Israel, under agreement in 2005, Ariel Sharon, you might remember Gush Katif, where they took out the Israeli citizens who were there, and they forced them out. And they said, okay, the Gaza Strip, we'll put a fence around it, Palestinians live there. And you live under the Palestinian, they didn't call it at that time the Palestinian Authority, but it soon became known as the Palestinian Authority. In other words, you want to live there separate from Israel, you can live there separate from Israel, and you'll be under the government of the Palestinian Authority. And then there are also some others, like in Jericho and a few places in the West Bank, who are also under the Palestinian Authority because they didn't want to be part of Israel. Others like living in Israel. I mean, they got good jobs, they make decent money. Even for that matter, there are people in Gaza and other parts of the Palestinian authorities who leave. They go through checkpoints. They even come from Bethlehem at some time, which is in Palestinian Authority. They come out, they go through the checkpoint, they work in Israel because they make better money there than they could ever make in Palestinian Authority, and then they go back home. And so it's because they want it that way. And that's why you've had this argument over many years over a two-state solution and all that. There's no way to accomplish it. It just doesn't work. But which is part of, you're asking the question from the other side of the coin, like, why is it? Well, because they hate one another. And really, it's, the Israelites have learned to hate them because it's like they're trying to kill us. I like the way that, I can't remember his name right now, but anyhow, he puts it very clearly. He says, the real simple way to understand the Middle East, you have two groups of people, and one group wants to kill the other. It really is, because if the Israelis laid down their arms today and said, okay, no more fighting, what would we see? Blood. If the Palestinians laid down their arms and said, we're done, no more of this, let's live at peace, what would we say? Okay, let's figure it out, they'd say. So the answer to your question is not as simple as you're asking it. I mean, it's a great question, but the bottom line is the easiest way to answer it in my book is they don't want it. The Palestinians don't want it because of their hatred for Israel. And that's the easiest way I can put it. Other questions? There's one over there. Is there a mic over here? Yeah, Joe.
John, when we were up in the Golden Heights, Elam was saying that not only was Israel the ring of fire, but they had a great protective system. Has it been learned where the breakdown was? That that we had such a surprise attack.
Yeah.
Where was it already embedded or implanted in the
Yeah.
in the state?
So there's the pregnant question, isn't it? Because Israel has a great system. They have the fence. The fence is not just a fence that keeps people from coming in or going out. It's an intelligent fence. It's divided into meters, so every meter, if anybody comes near it or just touches it, they can tell exactly where it was touched by what kind of a person between the cameras and everything else. So therefore, the question, okay, so what happens? Some people have said, well, this was the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, and it was Simchat Torah. It was the day when they get into the new reading of the Torah, and they had shut off the system. I don't buy all that. It's still being, my opinion, but that's all it is. That's you could buy a cup of coffee for less, but I have to believe that there's some games being played, because even today there was news that this enormous barrage of missiles had come, and that there were, like, I forget how many, it was an enormous number of drones, and they were all around the Sea of Galilee and all that. I was watching these maps going, oh my word, what's happening here? And then it was like, never mind, it wasn't. It was some sort of an AI trick. So I'm wondering, because Russia is definitely involved in this. Now, and that's not just an opinion. I've seen enough evidence of it. Russia's definitely involved. Of course, Iran is definitely involved. There's a lot of intelligence. I'm not talking about spy intelligence, that too. But I have to believe it was some sort of an AI thing that somehow shut the system down. That's all I can think. Yes?
In your opinion, since the United States has offered so much...
A little closer, in my opinion.
In your opinion, since the U.S. has provided so much financial and military aid to Israel, and the terrorists have threatened America. What do you think? How do you think they're going to act out their threats this time?
How do I
America.
think the terrorists will act out their threats?
Do you think there's any risk of, say, another 9/11?
I think there's tremendous risk of that. I'm probably more inclined to think that one ought to think terrorism instead of a major hit. I would tend to think of it as pockets of terror. The whole idea of terrorism is the word terror. I'm not trying to be glib. But the whole idea is spontaneous, brutal, strike fear to the point where you're not sure where to go, right? And so I don't know where what I've heard or what I read is the same thing the rest of us read, which is the sleeper cells are in the cities. It doesn't mean they're not other places, but for the most part, that's where the cells would be. Yes, I mean, I've traveled to Minneapolis enough in the last few years to see that every time I go to the airport, I haven't seen a person who doesn't look like they're from Somalia or something else. Everybody's got a head wrap. This is where they've been shipped when they flew them in, and so Dearborn, Michigan, and so yeah, there are places like that, but still, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, they're all over. It doesn't mean that they're not in Bucks County, but for the most part, they tend to be in those areas. So I don't know where to go. I just say, everybody says head on a swivel, but yeah, be careful, Yes, sir.
Yeah, John, they said they were attacked from the air, from the sea, from the land. Now, when they came in with those parachutes, how did Israel miss an airplane dropping off those guys that were coming in with those paragliders?
I understand. Yeah.
The kind that can direct where they're going.
Right.
Because they said that was their first surprise, and their main attack was with them guys.
Yep.
So it's like, they didn't see somebody up there because those airplanes, those parachute propellers.
Phil, different question, same answer.
Yeah,
Somehow it was missed. But I would say this also. Yes, we can say maybe it was a. Ray's back there. I don't know if there's anybody else over here. Okay. But yes, it's very possible that there was some sort of an AI thing. The other thing is, I don't know how else to put it, but we have to be careful of how much we depend on technology sometimes without the human. Who was first? Over here. Yes, sir.
So earlier this summer, it seemed
Keep your mic up
from
by
afar, there were all those protests in Israel. Netanyahu was trying to really make a lot of changes in the Knesset.
Yeah.
Do you think Iran was licking their chops?
Yes.
And they viewed Israel as weak and divided?
Just my humble opinion. Number one, everything I've heard is that this has been 2 years in planning. That's the stuff I've read. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I've read in many places. I don't know anything more than anybody else does here. I'm just trying to put it together. So I've read a number of places. This was 2 years in planning. I've heard the leader of radical Islam and all those in Turkey say this: 2 years in planning, working with Russia and working with Iran. So okay, 2 years in planning. But did they see a weakness in Israel where the nation was divided? Because one thing that Israel has always had up until just the summer is unity. And this whole judicial system has created this rift. That's gone now. The rift is gone. They're unified. But yeah, I agree with you. Ray.
Yeah, John, looking at what Israel's doing right now, I hear that they're attacking these.
Can you keep your mic up by your mouth?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Ray.
Okay. I'm not used to public.
That's all right.
But anyway, Israel is attacking these resupply columns right now. They're Iranian columns. Now, in saying that and it's hard to say how this is all going to turn out, but looking at the way things look now, we're right on a quick stepping stone to Ezekiel 38 and 39. All Israel has to do now to get in this is attack Iran in a major way.
Mm-hmm.
Russia and Turkey both have economic and military ties very strong with Iran.
Is there a question?
No.
I agree with you.
Yeah, okay. That's what I just wanted to get your opinion.
But the Ezekiel report says no one's going to be on their side, so not even the U.S.
Okay, so real quick, let's just take a look at this. Is there another question in the? We'll have room for one more. So give me a second here. What's that? Oh, well, two more. So bring Karen a mic too. Okay, so real quick. Right now, here's Israel, if you can see that, and the Gerald Ford and that whole carrier group is sitting out here. I'm not a Navy guy, but I know enough to know that there is just an astounding amount of power sitting out here. And the whole purpose of it is to hopefully keep everybody in check and to threaten Iran. Of course, Iran has said, if you even think of pulling a trigger, your country is next. But that's the idea. I forget the number of cruise missiles that are in that group. But they have a 1,600 kilometer range, which I think will take care of that pretty well. It's all a balance of power right now. But everything that you might be enjoying in terms of balance of power right now, stay awake, because all that's going to shift in the next couple of weeks. All of a sudden, people are going to say, okay, stop. This is enough. We don't see anymore. Stop that. Israel, you're the bully. So, okay, one back here.
Do you think it's the beginning of World War III?
My problem with the term World War III is that world war requires all nations to be involved. So this is not a world war necessarily. A lot of countries involved, but I prefer. I'm not trying to be a smart aleck, okay? When I say this, I prefer to go by what the Bible says. So I see it as the beginning of the Psalm 83 war, which is a local, big time, but a local war, and ultimately the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war, which does not include China. It does not include the United States. It's mostly still Islamic countries. Big time, and it'll be nuclear in my opinion. But whether it's a world war or not, it's the last war. I mean, even in Ezekiel 38 and 39 may or may not be happening while the Antichrist is ruling, which then brings up the question, does it happen before or after the rapture? People have lots of opinions. I tend to lean toward it happens after the rapture. Last question is Karen.
My question is nothing to do with tactics, but how do you speak to the Islamic people? I work with a coworker whose daughter is married to an Islamic fellow,
Mm-hmm.
and they believe everything is so peaceful. It's a prayerful religion. He's very follows 5 times a prayer, and I want to know how to speak to people in love, that you want to share the light of Jesus with them, because maybe they're deceived and don't see themselves as being that radical type. They think there's a division. And so I don't know how to speak to my coworker
I agree.
about that.
Well, and we'll wrap it up with Karen's question. I would not, just like you're saying, most Muslims who live in the United States, either honestly or dishonestly, will say, no, we're a peaceful religion, honestly or dishonestly. So giving someone the benefit of the doubt that they really do believe that it's a peaceful religion, because in their mosque, they're not radical. I remember Avi Lipkin used to talk about that. There's a lot of very honest, peaceful Muslims around, but when the radicals come around and say, we need you to do this, and you say, no, I'm a peaceful Muslim, they say, that's fine, but your daughter works where? Or your son does this? And suddenly you realize, oh, you're roped in. But to your question, what do? Well, you avoid the politics. The issue is Jesus Christ. You ask a simple question. How does this give you the hope of eternal salvation? What do you have to do to go to heaven? Because their answer is, well, I'm not really sure. I have to keep the 5 pillars. I have to do these things. And what's your hope? Because I know that God loved the world so much, all the people, including you, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever would place their faith in him. Well, no, Jesus is one of our prophets. Well, that's not what my Bible says. And by the way, my Bible was written before the Quran was ever considered. And if you want some literature, I can help you with it. There's a lot of good literature about how to witness to a Muslim. But keep the focus on Jesus Christ. Keep the focus on an empty tomb in Jerusalem. Where is Muhammad today? That's a good question. Where is Muhammad today? And by the way, always remember, you hear it said all the time, Allahu Akbar. Right? Allahu Akbar. Not Allah Akbar. Allahu Akbar. quick lesson. Many of you know it, but I think a lot of us hear the news instead. It does not mean God is great. That's what we keep hearing, that Allah means God, Akbar means great. That's not what it means. Allah is the name of their God, which is the new name, the more modern name for Ilya, which was the pagan moon god, which was the god they worshipped in Jericho, Ilya, who, those of you who went to Israel may still remember, that's a Semitic word for him or he. Allah, who he is. Allah, he is. Akbar, greater. Well, who do they think Allah is greater than? Our God, any God. That's what they're saying. Allah is greater. Allah, he is greater. And he's not. Didn't we just sing that tonight? Our God is greater. Our God is strong. We sing it a lot. They always sound the same to me after a while. But that's the point. And I think we have to keep focused on Jesus Christ, on God's love, God's kingdom. We serve a king. He's a loving and he's a righteous God. And he sent his son to pay the price for the sins of the whole world. And all one has to do is to place their faith in him, and their sins can be forgiven. A Muslim does not have that confidence. They're dealing with their sin all the time, and they never have the confidence of everlasting life. And yet the Bible says, John 5:13, these things have been written so that you may know that you have everlasting life. Same thing you'd say to a Roman Catholic, you could say to a Muslim. You don't have to worry about those things. You can know that you have everlasting life. Let's stand together.